Welcome to Cabernet and Pray, the podcast where we explore Christianity through the beauty of wine. And today's episode is fun. We're going to take a little bit of a turn, not necessarily talking about wine, although we're both drinking wine, but we're going to talk cocktails with someone who is really good at making them. This is episode 25 with Jordan Hughes. Jordan is a commercial photographer and videographer based in Portland, Oregon. He primarily works with bars and restaurants and liquor brands. He's also known as the High Proof Preacher on social media, where he's been sharing cocktail tutorials and techniques online for the last 7+ years, where on Instagram alone, he has more than 230,000 followers to this account. He runs an online learning platform that teaches aspiring creatives how to break into the cocktail liquor, photo, and video industry. As you may have imagined from the name, this is someone who has gone from the ministry world to the cocktail beverage world, and it is a fascinating story. You are going to love meeting Jordan. Enjoy episode 25.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happen in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I don't mind hearing nice things about me or not nice things. I'm used to that too. So,
well, Jordan, today I plan on only nice things. So, hey, I do want to welcome you to the podcast. We're so excited to have the High Proof Preacher here with us today.
Well, I'm honored. Yeah. Also, like any excuse I have to open a bottle of wine in the afternoon too, I'm thrilled.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'd tell people, like, I'm not doing this because I want to. This is work. This is professional stuff. Not anyone can just do the day drinking like I do,
Totally. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about what we're drinking today. I'll go first, explain what's in my glass, and then Jordan's going to explain what's in his glass, which is going to be new for a lot of people. So I'm excited. Today, I am rocking a Brunello Di Montalcino. This is a incredible wine from Italy. Sangiovese is the grape. If you like Tuscany area, if you've gone there, this is what they do. And this thing is this is a banger. This is a 2018. I was getting notes of cherry, dried fig, clove, and then some fun ones. I got like roasted tomato and balsamic. And so I'm just getting like a little Italian experience over here. That's what I'm enjoying. Jordan, what are you drinking?
Yeah. Well, I've been telling people this summer I'm in my my Pet Nat era. So Pet Nat, I guess it's a Petite Naturelle, something like that. This one was it's from a local winery here in kind of, I think they're out in the gorge now, but called Landmass. Two friends of mine started it, but it's their RU OK Pet Nat from 2022. It was something they started during the pandemic where they were like super small wine company. Now they've expanded quite a bit, but they started it to just like check in on their friends and to drop off a bottle of Pet Nat for different people. They just swing by, drop it on their porch and say hi, sort of thing. And they've kept it going. But yeah, let me see. I think it's just like it's made of unoaked Chardonnay. But yeah, I mean, for me, like I'm also not super articulate with tasting notes when it comes to wine. Wine's kind of a newer thing for me to get into, but it's definitely like perfect for just patio sipping. Green apple, lemon peel. There's a little bit of like anise in there, but just sparkling, refreshing, and just super easy to just crush it with friends. So if I open a bottle, I'm like, I'm not getting up till this bottle's done. So
I feel like when you open a bottle of anything sparkling, you have to just commit to like
right. Yeah.
It's not gonna be
I've got like the special, sealers that, supposed to keep the carbonation. I'm like, I never use them. I just finished the bottle. So
those sealers are for quitters, Jordan.
Right. Hey, exactly.
Well, that's a great choice on a warm Portland day. It's literally, we've exceeded 110 here in Arizona. So man, I don't feel bad for you, even though you were telling me it's a hot day. It's very hot here. And so I'm drinking a red. I don't know. I'm a sucker for punishment, I guess.
No, you're good.
I was looking it up after you sent it to me, and if you didn't know, you would think the bottle was ruach. Like I almost thought it was some cool Hebrew word or something. And then like, oh, it's RU OK, but like not the words.
I think they get that all the time. They're just like, oh, the ruach. What language is that? It's RU OK? Glass
of the rock.
Yeah.
Well, Jordan, you have such a cool story, and I connect to obviously parts of your story, and I'm excited to hear more of it today, and how some of our worlds overlap a little bit. But before we do, I would be amiss to miss an opportunity here on a personal note. Because I have a cocktail expert in my midst. And so my wife has a favorite drink. And I thought, before we get into anything serious, I got to make sure I get this in there. So the limoncello spritz is my wife's go-to drink. I saw recently you did a collab with Luxardo on this. So I know you may be branded in this regard and maybe limited in what you can say. But just as one dude to another who's trying to make his wife an awesome drink, any tips I need to know to make that thing real special for her?
I mean, I feel like with spritzes, it's one of those things where like when it comes to cocktails in general, I'm pretty like, measure everything. It's all about like consistency and, making sure you're like precise with your measurements and all that. With spritzes, I feel like it's one of the few times where I'm all like, you don't have to be very precise. You can kind of, I say like Swedish chef it, like the Muppet, where it's like, always just kind of like tossing stuff in. And that's where I feel like with spritzes, like, hey, you got bubbles, you got some sort of liqueur or bitter element in there. It's like, even if you don't nail the exact proportions, like it's going to be good. Just like with limoncello in general, like I'm honestly not actually a huge limoncello fan. So like for that particular collab with Luxardo, they have a limoncello, but they also have this liqueur called Bitter Bianco, which is like a gentian, kind of clear bitter liqueur. I often use that to make like a white Negroni, where it's kind of this very dry, bittersweet taste to it from gentian root. But that's where for that video, I was like, all right, like they wanted me to make a limoncello spritz. So like, we're promoting our limoncello, it has to be around that. I was like, well, can I split the base with limoncello and Bitter Bianco? And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. So it definitely makes it, a little less sweet. The Bitter Bianco is still a liqueur, so it has sweetness to it. But it brings in just a little more complexity to it, brings it more onto the bitter side of things. Which I also feel like is more Italian too. The aperitif or aperitivo, I guess, for Italian is like, it's meant to kind of stimulate the appetite before a meal. So that's where for my palate, I like things that go a little more on the bittersweet or bitter side of things. Without knowing your wife, she might like that, she might not. That's where it's like that might be a fun way to kind of experiment and see, like, for some people they're like Aperol. It's definitely more on the sweet side of bittersweet versus Campari, which is a lot more on the bitter side. So it just kind of depends, like what side of that spectrum she might be on, but. Personally, I'd say like splitting the base with limoncello and like another bittersweet liqueur can be a good way to go. Not only just to kind of give it a upgrade, but also just to add more complexity to the drink itself. So
I love it. I saw that split base, and I was like,
yeah,
this is exceeding my level of understanding. I don't even know what I don't know that other liqueur, so I didn't know.
Sure.
But great explanation. And
yeah, it very much comes down to like personal preference, and that I feel like that's part of the fun of cocktails, and how I got into cocktails was just like it is so customizable to to your own taste and preferences, and it's like a cool way of getting to know somebody, and also like for me, like making drinks for friends or when acquaintances come by the studio or home, it's fun to kind of like, it's like a fun challenge to figure out, like, okay, what does this person like? And then how can I like, give them like a really cool experience or a surprise by like, oh, I mentioned, or I overheard that they really like mezcal or something, and coming up with something that really like feels very customized to them. And I feel like people just go like, whoa, like you really thought through this. You really like put time and work into making a drink that is something that's special to me. So, yeah, so I'm kind of going on there, but that's kind of how I feel like I got into it, was just like there's kind of some magic in the customizable side of cocktails.
No, I think that's the same with wine too. Is I'll have someone like, oh, I don't drink wine, and I'll ask them, like, what have you had that you didn't like? And they'll say a couple, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of figure out what you don't like, and then have you had anything that you did like or that wasn't terrible? And then you kind of go from there. And it is really cool. Like when someone says, I don't like this, and then you find a drink for them that they go, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. And you're like, yes, like I just connected worlds for you. And you can do that all sorts of drinks. So well done to you. All right, I'm going to try that, and I'll have to report back on the findings. Okay. So I was in ministry for 2 decades. I left. My final role was as a lead pastor. Thought I was going to retire, and in that role in that church. I've since not gone back into any traditional role, and now doing things like a wine podcast where we talk theology and life. You were also a pastor, no longer a pastor. Now you are a big name making cocktails on social media. Tell us a little bit of that journey. How do you go from that to where you are today?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of like, okay, where do I start? But I mean, to go over kind of at least briefly, like, grew up as a church kid, going to Sunday school. My dad was an elder at my church growing up. So he wasn't like on staff, but was, kind of, part of the leadership team. When we kind of like jumped into like this church plant where the church I grew up at, church was kind of getting birthed out of that. And so from like age 12, 13, kind of, some of those peak youth group years, was just super involved in this church plant. And for me, I was like, my heroes were my youth pastor, my pastor. And I was like, oh, I want to be a pastor someday. Cause I'm like, I'm going to camps, and I'm like, their job is to just take us to camp. That sounds awesome. So was super involved with youth group and became like the youth group worship leader. And that very much kind of became my identity for high school and even early college. Like I went to Multnomah University here in Portland, so Bible college, got my degree in Bible and theology, but kind of stayed living at home and volunteering a ton at my church all through high school and college. And then even when I graduated, I did like a church internship overseas. It just was like, fully in sort of thing. Then when I like got home and got a job at a church, and again, this is kind of the fast version, but, got a youth pastor job, and eventually kind of moved into like family pastor. I was over like youth, kids, all of that. Basically like got into working as a pastor at a church and was just like, oh, like this is killing me. And there's different levels to that. I think there's a piece of that where it's like, just being in a role that maybe wasn't right for me. Like for me, it was like this leadership role over volunteers and trying to staff kids' rooms on Sundays while also trying to figure out youth group. And there's just like a lot that I had to figure out. That was just a lot for, early mid 20 something year old out of Bible college. It's like, oh, like this is a lot of just responsibility. And for me also, it was just a time of like, I had grown up in church. My wife and I, got married early 20s as well. And, your 20s still very much kind of like growing up and figuring out what adulthood looks like, and now being married and having this job, and started to have stuff of like, oh, like even with church and working for a church and seeing like, all right, there's still, part of wanting to work for a church and go into ministry was like, oh, like there's no like sales goals. There's no like KPIs, it's about people, and it is, but it's like churches still have to make money, and there's still, there's still goals. There's still, the struggles are a little different, but got to kind of these simultaneous like point of burnout, but also this point of like starting to wrestle with my own faith and kind of my own, like, they're not necessarily like just yet like, am I a Christian, but stuff of like, oh, like there's maybe some things about church or about Christianity as a whole that I don't actually jive with, or that now as I'm an adult and kind of out of like my parents' house and out of kind of my youth group bubble, it's like, oh, life just works a little differently than I thought it did, than I thought it does. And when you're in the middle of thinking through some of these big questions and doubts, but your whole career is around leading people and not doubting, at least I felt very like, I can't even ask these honest questions because my career, my livelihood depends on me knowing and me leading people and leading kids and all of that. So for me, it just kind of got to a point where it's like, I just have to do something else, at least for a while. It wasn't even like, I'm leaving ministry, I'm leaving Christianity. It was just like, I just have to do something different that's not connected to church stuff for a bit. So that was at least kind of the long short of like that kind of switch for me. Getting into cocktails and posting drinks online was a little unexpected. Like I had always kind of done photography on the side, as so many people do. It's like, it's a fun creative outlet. I have a camera, I have some lenses, I can kind of mess around. So I was doing some of that. I was also doing some graphic design work. I was just kind of like, while I'm kind of in this, okay, I'm stepping aside from this career or this calling or whatever we call it for a while. I was like, I might as well do something that's just fun, that I enjoy and that's creative. So I was trying to see what creative things stuck. And I was really into making cocktails just for fun. Another creative outlet of like, people would come over. I was always a little careful about it as a pastor, because I'm like, this might look kind of weird to some people. So I was a little more secretive about it, but it was still this very like kind of enjoyed the hospitality side of like, we'd have people over and I would come up with a drink menu. I'd design an actual menu and come up with the drinks, and that aspect was really fun for me. So that's where I eventually just started. Since I was a pretty decent photographer, I would just start posting photos of the drinks I came up with at home and sharing the recipes. And I didn't necessarily put my face on it at first when I was still working at the church, but was just kind of like, oh, here's a way to kind of share some of the stuff I was making. And then once I kind of stepped aside from the church job, I, immediately kind of felt that freedom a bit of like, oh, I can kind of reinvent myself a little. I don't necessarily have to be as secretive about like, I make drinks for people. So with that, I started kind of sharing more about just, making cocktails. I started getting to know different like distilleries in Portland, kind of the mom and pop ones of just the smaller companies. And they started seeing my work and being like, hey, like you're, I wasn't a bartender. They're like, you're a guy at home making drinks, but the people buying our stuff are people at home making drinks, and they want to know what to do with it. Even just you asking questions like, all right, so my wife likes this spritz. How can I upgrade it? It's like a little different than, a bartender who's thinking pour cost and being able to make, 100 of these drinks a night. So I kind of just fit this spot for kind of these small distilleries to be like, oh, like I can come up with recipes that are geared for your at-home enthusiast, but I could also take really good pictures of their products and their cocktails. So it's kind of this 1-2 thing, like you get the recipe and you get the marketing assets sort of thing. And that's how I got into it. Really was like, oh, like I'm solving a problem here for these distilleries and kind of providing them with this service. And I feel like it snowballed from there, where as I started working with more distilleries, I started going to some industry events like Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans that are very heavy, bartender, liquor brand industry event. Got to know some PR people there, some people at bigger brands, and just eventually kind of grew and grew, where it wasn't like an overnight, like these days you have people who post a video on TikTok and blow up, and the next day they quit their job and they're like, I'm a TikToker now. For me, it was very kind of this long, slow burn of very much like a snowball of just kind of like working with bigger and bigger companies. And starting out, I was just kind of like, I do cocktail photography, but I also do social media management, or I can make drinks for a Nike event, or I can do some graphic design for this realtor or whatever. So it's kind of hodgepodging stuff, but it was something where like, well, I enjoy the cocktail photography thing. At first, it's like, that's way too niche to be a job. But I really enjoy that. But then it was like, well, that's what I was getting known for and getting most attention for. So I was like, maybe I should just kind of double down on that for a bit and see where that goes. And here we are 7 years later, where like I kind of introduced myself generally as like, I'm a cocktail and liquor brand photographer, also videographer now. So it's still not very succinct, but I'm like, I generally work with beverage related companies. It doesn't have to be booze, but it tends to be more in the kind of liquor cocktail world. But yeah, so I ended up kind of just focusing on that again, just as kind of like, let's see what happens. And yeah, kind of becoming a little more specialized there was really beneficial for me. And yeah, now it's like I do kind of a variety of things there's the social media side, there's the kind of influencer-y type things, but then there's also this, it's a commercial photo video business as well. So it's kind of two things that overlap and they complement each other very well. But overall, I'm like, it's also just a really fun way to make a living. Not without its struggles, of course, as with anything, but I'm pretty thankful to get to do what I do, for sure.
Well, it is fascinating to hear, and that was a great summary of how you get from point A to point B. What were the emotions in that transition? Because a lot of people that I talk to on this podcast in particular have some transitional moment with the church, right, where they're entering into a new era where they're not in the same role, not in the same faith tradition, or something's changing. And a lot of people who are listening and watching this are also in a similar transition. They're trying to figure out, how do you navigate this? I'd be curious, was it just blue sky? This is so great. Did you have moments where you thought, I'm losing my mind, this doesn't make any sense? Were your family concerned for you? I mean, like, what was the human side of this? Obviously, it worked out for you, but
sure.
How did it feel in that process?
Yeah, no, great questions. Yeah. I mean, it was hard. It was kind of a little bit of all that that you mentioned, but I think at first, like, it was very much this, I was like, even considering leaving the church job felt like, oh, is this okay? I think also just growing up as a church kid too, like I just had that inner voice of like, maybe like thinking I'm in trouble all the time, which isn't necessarily like my parents. It was just like part of just, you have a God who's, watching you every move sort of thing. And I kind of had this feeling of like, no, me working for a church is like a calling. This is what I'm called to. So for me, I was kind of spinning out on this, like, wait, so if I leave, am I walking away from like God's calling on my life? And that was like really hard for me, of just like, am I like sinning by like quitting this church job? So at first that was the initial like, oh my gosh, like, and it was kind of a bit of a process of kind of talking with various mentors, kind of even in the church world, who are like, Jordan, like it's okay. Like, like you can quit a job and like, it's, so it took a few people just being like, almost kind of giving me permission sort of thing. And then even once I was kind of like not working for a church, there was that initial like I kind of felt the pressure release of like, my livelihood isn't based around, like I can actually start asking some of these hard questions about what it is I believe. Like, are my beliefs different from my parents? Is that okay now that I'm an adult, and all of those kind of things that you just wrestle with. And I feel like for my wife and I too, it was kind of cool that she was a missionary kid. I was a pastor's kid, so we kind of both had this similar upbringing, married very young, as a lot of people in the church do. And then I feel like kind of grew up together in our 20s, where we both kind of had this, journey, which I also feel is kind of on the Christianese spectrum of things, but where we kind of were like realizing, oh, like life just works a little different. We kind of both grew up with like, yeah, like if you're in the church, you're good. If you're out, things are rough, things are bad, or anyone who leaves the church, it's like, oh, like we pray for them and we feel bad for them and we hope they come back. And for us, it was like, not only this personal freedom of like, oh, now that we're no longer like on staff, and then we kind of were like, we didn't even reconnect into a church, just attending. We kind of tried there for a while, but we enjoyed this like no ulterior motive to meeting people, of being like, we can meet someone and we don't have this like, we got to invite them to church, we got to ask them if they're saved. And we just so enjoyed like this kind of like, oh, we can just meet someone and love them for them and not feel like we got to get them here or we're not doing our job. And I feel like in that we kind of were like, wait, here's all these people. And for me in the bar world, which even previously, like, oh, kind of, it's like, oh, bar world, that's the opposite of church or whatever, alcohol, meeting all these bartenders and people in the industry, which there's a broad range of people, but for the most part, I was like, oh, I was meeting these people who work at bars whose whole job, yeah, there's making drinks, but their whole job is like giving people an experience and making whoever walks in feel welcomed. Again, not every bartender. Some bartenders are really shitty, but a lot of the ones I was meeting and getting to know, I was like, oh, here's these people who are so loving and awesome. And like, these people aren't, some of them maybe were Christians, but it was like, here's these people who aren't, in this church world that I was used to, who are good people. And this might sound kind of really rudimentary to some listeners, but it was like, it was weird for me to be like, oh, here's people who aren't Jesus followers and who are like just really good, wonderful, loving, kind humans. And it that like clashed with what I was given growing up in Sunday school and in church. And like, yeah, if you walk away, you're all of your morals go out the window and you're just going to be a horrible human, is more or less kind of what I got, was like, oh, here's all these like people outside the church who are actually very loving and good. And in many cases do a better job of loving people and caring for people than a lot of the people I grew up with or spent time with in church. And again, that's kind of broad strokes. There's still, I know lots of wonderful, incredible people who I still love and have a relationship with in the church, who very much give me hope and like, okay, it's, but it was just like such a contrast between just how I thought world worked and just kind of my own worldview, to then kind of getting outside of the church world, church bubble, if you will, and being like, oh, this is just not what I was told it was like out here. And it was certainly a long process for both my wife and I. Like, I mean, to get very intimate, I guess, like we kind of had our time of like, do we even make sense together? We got married as young Christian kids and we did the communion at our wedding. And now here we are in our late 20s. We're like, we're different humans. We wouldn't say our marriage is centered around Jesus anymore. And we're like, does this still even work? So we kind of had a lot of very intense, kind of honest searching for our own personal faith journey, our own marriage, and just so many things in life, just kind of like, like just feeling untethered and kind of like, whoa, like who even are we anymore, sort of thing. So, so definitely like rough, was not like an easy, I don't even know how many years that would span, but at least kind of around, thankfully, right before pandemic, wife and I kind of like, we did some marriage counseling and just a lot of kind of seeking different mentors throughout our life of like, okay, like, are we Christians? Are we not? I don't really know anymore, but we decided like, no, like we want to be together. We want to figure out what does life look like on, beyond the fence of kind of the circle of church and Christianity, and not necessarily want to just throw all of that away, but being like, okay, like how can we just live life differently? Because life works differently than what we were handed. Yeah. So very much kind of got to this point of like, we're going to figure this out. We're together. We want to be together. And we want to be there to support each other through this kind of like reimagining life and reimagining faith, whatever that looks like. And then of course, 2020 hit and so many more kind of things with pandemic and all of that. And we also had our first child in 2020. So many crazy things have kind of like, happened since then. Yeah. It's like becoming a parent is already such a, blows up your life, but to have that in the middle, August 2020 was just like, things were already blown up anyway. So lots of crazy stuff in the years since then. And yeah, now, 2024 time of recording, still figuring out life and faith and what that looks like, but now with 2 kids, 2 daughters. But yeah, very much kind of in this place of kind of accepting like, oh yeah, like we aren't who we used to be. We don't believe what we used to believe, but we're also like, not wanting to just like throw out everything we were given growing up. I feel like there was a time we were almost angry at kind of like, you're not angry, but just kind of annoyed or a little just like, like I lived in such a small box and then I kind of felt like I was duped a little. And there's lots of things I was very thankful for with growing up and a lot of things I was protected from. But I think for a while we were kind of like, screw this. I can't believe that, and now we're a little bit more of kind of this like, there's still a lot of good that we were handed and a lot of things with our upbringing and the faith we were handed that was good, even though we've kind of departed from kind of exactly how we used to believe or think. Now we're kind of more in this like a little more open of like, all right, there's a lot of things that are really good, but there's also things we want to do differently for us. And also just with being parents now, we're like, you think about it differently with kids and being like, all right, there's still some things we want to impart to our children and maybe some things we don't. And that just kind of changes how you approach things as well. But yeah. So that's another kind of, I feel like my summaries end up being really long summaries. So.
These are just fascinating answers. And I'm sure our listeners and watchers are like dialed in right now. This is great. You're making me realize we often talk about how the church, and I mean kind of the church collectively, uses fear. And I think most of the time when people hear that or see that, they think of like hell, right? Like that's often a fear-based, like if you don't do this, this is the consequence. But as I'm listening to, I'm realizing there's like this implied fear, and I haven't really even ever articulated it as I'm kind of just processing what your answer is. But there's this implied fear of if you get too far away from, you use the phrase the box. If you get too far away from this box, things are going to go bad for you. And I think a lot of people in transition in their faith, for whatever reason, have that fear that they're grappling with of like, what does it mean if I change my views? What does it mean if I don't go to this community anymore? What does it mean if I branch out, right? Because that fear is very much implied. And I remember for us, the first time we went through something really difficult personally as a family, post being on a church staff, I realized I had this like unknown of like, will anybody be there for us? Because like I was
Right.
programmed of like the church is the one that's there for you. And we weren't at that season, we weren't a part of a church community. I was like, I don't know if we're going to get anything. And then watched, as you said, people all over come around us and support us. And in oftentimes more tangible ways than the church, you know, quote unquote. And so you do realize like, oh, like there is life in the church and there's life outside of the church. And
Yeah.
and like there's good in both, but we often have this implied fear that we don't even name at times. And yet it takes a story like yours, you know, to go, oh yeah, like you can make it outside of there and you don't die. Like,
right.
You have some hard questions, but you're still doing okay. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
I wonder how many people just need almost that permission for their own journey.
Right. Yeah. Totally. Because I mean, because for me, like I said, like it was very much growing up in the church, being highly involved to the point where I was like, yeah, it's all my friendships, every like meaningful mentor I've ever had, it's all someone from church. Like I said, like my marriage, it's like we were married at the same church. Like our marriage was around, it's you, me, and Jesus. It's all like everything in my life is centered around this. So to like, first it was like the anxiety simply of like, oh, this is my livelihood. Yeah, because when you're working for a church, as you know, it's this other layer of complexity where like this is attached to how I support my family and how I live. But even taking that out of the equation, it's still, it's like, yeah, every other aspect of my life is connected to this somehow. To where like,
you don't even realize.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and you don't realize it until you start untethering or stepping away.
That's shoot. People talk about deconstructing. That's the scary part is as you start doing some of these things, you start realizing, oh, I have this assumption and I have this assumption and I'm about to challenge them and see what happens. And you do it in real time.
Totally. Yeah. And that's where it's like, there's this level of like, it's not necessarily like it's guaranteed, like you get to the other side and you're like, I'm all good. I still have friends. Like, it's not like it's a guaranteed outcome either, but it is kind of like this, it's tricky because at least for me, I know not everyone has the exact same church experience, but like there is kind of that narrative of like, oh, if you leave, it's going to be so hard and life's going to crash and burn. And, there is almost that validation in that, I always hesitate even saying deconstruction now because it's kind of a buzzword now, but that season of when you are untethering or deconstructing where you're like, yeah, it feels like the world is crumbling, like your world at least is crumbling. So it almost validates the narrative of like, oh yeah, my pastor always said if I left, life would suck and everything, I would lose everything. And in a sense, like that is true. Like, but the thing is, I don't know, like for some people, maybe like there's a point where like, all right, no, I'm going to go back, and for me, like, I'm actually very thankful for both my wife and I, which is also very kind of not surprising, but it's like, it was, I'm thankful we both kind of went through the process and ended up in a similar place and wanting to continue and seeing each other with our flaws and like, okay, no, we still want to do this. So I've had many friends who are like, we got married with you, me, and Jesus, and now it doesn't make sense, if it had to part ways. So for us, it was cool to have that shared experience of like absolute terror for both of us, and then to both get through it, to face, like for me, I talk about it like walking up to the edge of a cliff and being like, oh my God. And like, we both kind of went there together and then kind of stopped. We're like, I got you. So that's where I feel like being able to get through that process and now getting to dream a bit and be like, okay, like what does our lives look like outside of the box or beyond the fence, whatever metaphor I would decide to stay on. It's kind of like, it's actually really, it's still hard. There's things that I talk about of like, I miss a lot of aspects of being in a church and the community aspect and this normal, like weekly scheduled social connection but there's this piece of like, I feel like again, not trying to sound like, oh, like I'm above it or I've grown beyond it. Like if church or a certain way of thinking or spirituality fits for someone, I'm like, wonderful. I'm not trying to convince anyone to get out of it. For me, like, now I kind of feel like, all right, there are things I miss about church and I would love to go back, but I'm like, I'm just different now. I'm just a different human. It would be kind of forcing myself into a shirt that doesn't fit. It's not like the shirt's bad. It's just like, this doesn't fit me anymore. I could try to squeeze into it, but like I miss wearing it. I miss the stuff I did. I miss the memories attached to it, but like, this just isn't me anymore. I've changed. I just can't really go back. That's not necessarily like I'll never be part of a church again. But just like, I am just a different human than I was 10 years ago. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for what I've learned through that. And I still don't totally know what that looks like for life and faith, and whether we're part of a evangelical church or another type of, faith practice. But it's just kind of like this very kind of bittersweet of like, there are so many good memories and things that I love and appreciate. But at the same time, I'm like, I can acknowledge like, yeah, but I'm different, and I can't just go back to how things used to be, for better or for worse. Well, mostly for better, but
yeah, no. And this is a very similar story that I hear, a lot of people who have this journey. And so one of the questions I love asking people, and I think your answer could be fascinating. If you look at the last 10 years, we'll say, so obviously the last 7 have been kind of in this role you're in right now. How would you describe the ways in which your faith has changed? Right. So whatever you would describe your faith as today, can you articulate like, hey, I changed gears on this, and this, or it's very different in this way?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's something that I, in some ways, struggle with, because I think part of, again, kind of the growing up, at least in the kind of faith, kind of Calvary Chapel-ish type background, where I'm kind of used to like, you got to have your points, your, statement of faith sort of thing. So there's a bit where I kind of have this inner, like, I need to have exactly what I have. I need to know exactly what I believe and be able to articulate it. And I feel like part of the journey for me is kind of being okay with like, I can't fully articulate it yet. It's kind of part of where I'm at, but I feel like some of the big stuff for me, and a lot of this kind of came also with like, as I was preparing to, have my first child, and as that just messes up your world and your beliefs in a lot of different ways. But one of the aspects of just like, kind of the core belief of like, yeah, people are sinful and wrong and deserve hell unless they have Jesus, sort of thing. And for me, I think that's connected to a lot of different experiences for me of, like I mentioned, like kind of leaving the church, stepping out of the faith circles and being like, oh, here's these wonderful, beautiful people, loving people in ways that I was like, there are no ulterior motives here. And they aren't trying to convert you or get you to a Wednesday night study, and just seeing people care for people selflessly, and being like, again, people still, there are selfless, loving people in the church too, not trying to deny that, but just like seeing that in such abundance outside the church and being like, cool. So these people are sinful and destined to hell. I was just like, huh. And then just this piece of like, oh yeah, like a belief system that's founded on you're in or you're out. And it's that black and white and no nuance. And I feel like that, as I started to kind of question that, I feel like that's when things really started to kind of crumble for me, when it came to like my Christian beliefs of just like the lack of nuance, the flattening, the just like, you're either on our team or you're not. And yeah, the gospel is great news, but it's just good news for these people. And you could be a really shitty human, but as long as you believe, it's just stuff where I feel like those are the things that really kind of hit me hard first, where maybe that was the first thing that fell for me, was like, just like, to be quite honest, I don't believe in hell anymore. I just don't think that's I feel like that's a big one where a lot of, family members or, even church friends who I still have, like, yeah, that's a big thing. Cause it's like, yeah, if you don't have eternal punishment, what did Jesus come for? You know, it just starts to, you know, knock a lot of things down. So that at least is, I guess, a pretty big one. One of the first things for me where I'm like, a belief system that is based around a threat of violence. I just am like, come on. Like, like even as like a kid where I'm like, yeah, if someone tells me you're going to hell, you're never going to see your parents again, that's an easy yes, sign me up for Christianity. And I just am like, I just don't think that's how it works. And yeah, so with that, like, you know, that kind of breaks down a lot of things, kind of the original sin mindset of like, even thinking through now with having two beautiful daughters and thinking through, okay, like, I don't want them to be saddled as a, you know, 3-year-old. What, you know, my oldest is almost 4 and she's just very perceptive, and thinking about telling her like, oh yeah, like you are sinful and you're going to go to hell, which was told to me as a 3 or 4-year-old, and being like, oh, like I can't imagine giving that to a 4-year-old and that weight and that like you are evil unless you do this. To me, I'm just like, oh, that's so, to me, I just like, that is harmful. That is not okay. So that's at least my, like, that was kind of one of the first things of just like, I don't want to saddle my kids with this weight. And there's going to be hard questions someday, I'm sure, but I'm like, I don't want them to have to be this child, like wrestling through like this idea of original sin and like you're just a horrible, evil person and goodness is outside of you. I feel like that was a hard thing. That's still a hard thing for me. Of I have the inner voice of like I mentioned, like, oh, I'm always in trouble, or I can't trust myself, or if someone's making me feel uncomfortable, it's a me problem. It's not because, you know, so also as a safety thing with young girls too, it's like, no, I don't want them to think that they can't trust their own inner voice, that their flesh is wrong and deceitfully wicked. Like I want them to be able to recognize, to be in their body and to trust themselves and to not think, oh, the only goodness is outside of me and I have to trust in this other thing to find goodness. Yeah, that's at least kind of a snippet in kind of where I am currently. And those were kind of maybe the big chinks or big holes in the wall that kind of made things start to crumble for me. Just because those are big things, of course. And that's connected to a lot of different things. And like I said, like, I don't necessarily have, you know, a super nicely, like I did in Bible college, I had a very nicely formatted bulleted point. Here's what I believe. Here's what I don't believe, sort of thing. I'm like, I don't have that anymore, but at least kind of have these threads that I'm pulling on, maybe still pulling on a bit. So yeah, that at least gives you a snippet, at least, hopefully.
And for anyone watching or listening, if you pull on the thread of is eternal conscious torment really the way God works, and you challenge that, you will have a similar experience to Jordan. You will start to realize, oh, I'm unraveling all sorts of things that then don't make sense because they all hinge on this one thing. And if this one thing isn't legit, which a lot of us have issues with, then yeah, the whole thing, you have to start making sense of it. So that's you're not alone. That's
yeah.
You mentioned in one of your videos, and I thought this was a very intriguing perspective, that when you were younger, you didn't abuse alcohol. And so you don't today as an adult have a lot of the negative connotations that often adults bring into it. I thought that was so interesting because that's been my experience. I grew up in a house, alcohol was never around. I just didn't grow up with it. My parents didn't drink. And so I got into alcohol way later in my life. But it's such a fascinating insight. Can you talk more about the significance of that for you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, like you said, it's like didn't have alcohol in my house growing up. Both, I don't want to share too much of my parents' background just because it's their story, but they just both came from pretty just hard backgrounds with you know, parents who either had, you know, alcohol abuse issues or just kind of some family history stuff, where both my parents, like when they got married, were just like, we don't want that for our family. They were also like, because, there is sometimes this hereditary aspect with alcohol abuse or kind of addiction in general. I think for both my dad and mom were like, we just don't even want to take a chance sort of thing. And we're just going to kind of a blanket, no alcohol. I think I saw them have like a Bud Light on vacation once as a kid, or a glass of wine. And it was always like, oh, whoa, mom and dad. Like, but it was just like this very, like, even then it was like, they would drink a glass of wine once we went to bed. And if we opened the door, they were like, so it was very much like, yeah, blanket thing, no alcohol, which I honestly appreciate. And that's where I kind of said in that video that I posted was like, I appreciate their, even if it was a very heavy-handed for them, it's like, maybe they didn't have to be that extreme, but for them, they were like, they saw firsthand what alcohol abuse can do and how that affects people. And, one of my uncles died way too young, largely connected to alcohol abuse. So that's where it's like, they both had like intimate knowledge of what that can do. So for them, they're just like, yeah, we just don't want that for our family. We're kind of breaking this cycle, which I'm very thankful for. And yeah, like I said, I feel like for me, they kind of gave me, which wasn't what they were intending necessarily, but they kind of gave me this gift of I'm like, hey, now I'm high proof preacher. And I tilt my camera, you just see a wall covered in liquor. But yeah, like for me, like when I turned 21, I don't think I even had a drink. Like it just was like, I don't care. Like this, I didn't have a history of it. Like I said, I never partied. Again, I was church kid. I was worship leader as a high schooler. I went to Bible college. At the Bible college I went to, you had to sign a contract saying you would not drink while you're enrolled at this university. And people broke that all the time, but I didn't. I was a good church kid. So like, I graduated, turned 21, didn't have a drink. And then I think it wasn't until I was like 22. So like a year later, it was when I was doing this internship in Europe, and had a glass of wine in Spain and was like, oh, this is kind of nice. And just was, I'm trying to remember when I had like my first like cocktail, because cocktails were very much kind of the thing for me where I was like, whoa, like this is fascinating. Got into cocktails and spirits very much from this craft kind of culinary perspective of like, oh, like here's this cocktail, and you can make it so many different ways to cater to a person's preferences. Like I said at the beginning of this, and then just spirits in general. Like, first got into whiskey. There's a lot of guys just kind of like, all right, whiskey, bourbon, this is cool. But then you get into tequila, mezcal, all of these spirits that aren't just like taste good, fun in cocktails, but there's all this like cultural, historical significance behind these different spirits. And even behind just like one spirit, they're like, rum in itself was like, that's one where like, yeah, a lot of my friends who had kind of like, partying background, they're like, I hate rum because that's what you get shit faced on in college. But like rum, it's like, it's such a diverse spirit where it's made differently in every region of the world. Part of that's why it's the pirate spirit, because there's not a whole lot of rules around it. So like every country makes it differently. Even within a country, there's going to be different regions, different distillers are going to have their own style. There's certain ones that like are very funky and fruity, others that are very dry, have a ton of terroir. It's just like such a broad range of styles and flavors and cultural significance. So for me, it was just like this just incredible trip of discovery and of like learning about the world in a way I hadn't seen it before through cocktails. It was something that was like a hobby that was very exciting to me, something that I was like, I can't get bored of this because there's so much to learn, whether that's the cocktails, whether that's the ingredients, the cultures behind them. It's just like, there's so many different rabbit holes I could go down, but it's also something that is designed to be shared with people. And that's part, the hospitality aspect of like, yeah, I can have this wall full of booze, but I'm like, why I have this is because like, I'll have people by here and be like, what are you interested in? What do you want to try? And I get to share all the stuff that all the knowledge and experiences that I've gained. and now pass it on to somebody else. And then now they have this experience and this excitement to also learn, not just because what's in the glass is good, but because there's so much behind it. And yeah, you could kind of probably even see it in my face on the webcam. It's just like, there's just so much cool stuff in there. So that's where it was just cool to come into that without any baggage. And even if you have, I still have people who are like, oh, tequila, I can't do it because I threw it up, or, you can still redeem it. I feel like, to use a Christian word, but having good tequila, having good tequila is like whoa, like it's kind of a light bulb. It's a born again moment, so I can still speak this language if I have to, So, but yeah, like, and that's like part of the fun for me too, is like, if someone's used to just getting blasted with, tequila and bad memories, but then if I pull out some, Cascanes number 10, that, this is a $70 bottle of tequila, like, you aren't supposed to shoot this with lime and salt. There's so much flavor and terroir just within this liquid. And seeing someone try that and being like, I had no idea you could sip on a Blanco tequila and that would actually be good. Like having that moment with someone is just so cool. And that's where I'm like, I'm thankful for that, to bring it back. Like the gift my parents gave me, where it's like, I don't have this kind of the baggage or the bad memories I have to get over. And also just even for my own life and health, where like, people might see like, whoa, you have a ton of booze on the wall, but it's also like, yeah, and almost all these bottles are full. Like, I'm not just sitting in here drinking. Like, it's very much something that, now it's a little tricky too, because it's my work. It's assigned more to what I do every day, but it's like, it's very much connected to like, I'm not just in here drinking cocktails or drinking spirits. It's still very much, for me, something that's associated with sharing with people. So like, I always feel kind of weird. Sometimes I'll just be like, oh, like I got a new spirit, or, oh, I got this new whiskey in the mail, so I'm going to, pour myself something to try it. But I always feel weird just kind of sitting down and drinking something on my own. I'm like, no, I want to share this with someone. I have this excitement about it. And that's part of the excitement, is to get to pass it on and share it with other people. So for me, that again, I am aware of just how fortunate I am. And that's why I did the video, was just kind of like, this is a privilege that I've been given, that it's not, booze isn't something I go to medicate with. It really is attached to learning and to a culinary experience and to sharing with other people. And that's where it's truly something that has enriched my life, and has brought, some really incredible friendships. And yeah, even meeting you, just, connecting with people over a liquid, over something that can be harmful if used in a certain way. But at the same time, like it's something that has only made my life more beautiful and has given me a broader understanding of the world and of people. And yeah, with that, it's like, it's still something to be careful of. It's still, good to check yourself and all of that. But I'm very thankful for having that background, that my parents had that like kind of initial feeling of like, no, like we don't want to risk anything for our kids just because they've seen it. But giving me that separation and that protection, I feel like allowed me to go into it with this kind of just beautiful intention, and have a truly just really life enriching experience. So yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm still preaching. So
the easiest guest I've ever had on this podcast. I have so many questions I'm not going to get to, because you have great answers. So okay, I'm going to ask a few practical cocktail questions.
Oh yeah,
hit me with it. A wine question, and then we're going to do a speed round. Okay.
All right.
So we'll try to dial it in here, but I would be remiss to miss some of these things. Okay, so looking through your book. Plug for your books. It's very fun.
Oh, hey.
The drink that jumped out at me was the banana sidecar. Had no idea. I love banana, but I was like, I can't even picture what this thing would taste like. Literally you picture it, but I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had anything like it. What's
Sure.
funny is you make this drink sound so easy to make, and it's 8 ingredients. 8. I counted them. I'm like, I'm not pulling this thing off anytime soon. If we ever hang out in person, Jordan, this is the drink I'm hoping I can talk you into making for me, because I would be fascinated to drink this. But it got me thinking, as I was like, man, that thing's awesome. Do you have a go-to if you're hanging out with some friends and there's like, hey, Jordan, what do you want to drink tonight? Like, what's your go-to as the cocktail guy? What's your go-to cocktail?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like part of it kind of depends on the season, right? I mean, honestly, like people ask like favorite spirit or spirit category. I do gravitate more towards like agave spirits now. So tequila, mezcal, raicilla, like it's kind of a broad category. But so I often go more towards like, I mean, I make a ton of margaritas. Oh, there's that. But there's a drink called the Naked and Famous, which is a mezcal cocktail. Has mezcal, Aperol, so 4 ingredients on this one. But mezcal, Aperol, yellow chartreuse, and fresh lime. So it's in the more kind of refreshing, citrusy type cocktail. But it's got the mezcal, which people think of mezcal simply as smoky. There's more layers to it than that, but there's certainly a smoky element. It's kind of like a spicy element to some mezcal as well. Aperol, kind of bittersweet orange. Chartreuse is kind of all kinds of botanicals in there. So it's 4 ingredient cocktail, but it's just a lot of different layers to it that are just really delicious. But it ends up being kind of like a more complex margarita. And it's like a bright kind of red, almost pink color too. So it's always just like pretty, really refreshing, refreshing cocktail, but something that you also feel like you don't want to drink quickly. It's a little lighter on the booze, but you're like, okay, like there's just so many flavors going on. You kind of want to sip it slowly. And so that's one of my favorites. Honestly, like Portland weather, climate, cold, I lean a lot. I do really enjoy a lot of kind of spirit forward cocktails, more in the old fashioned type of realm. So one of my favorites is a Sazerac, which is similar to an old fashioned, where it's you typically make it with rye whiskey or cognac, a little bit of sugar, something called Peychaud's bitters, which is just another kind of bitters that are kind of like a kind of bitter cherry, kind of has this medicinal element to it, and then like a bit of absinthe. And you typically stir it with ice, so it's chilled, but then you serve it just in like a rocks glass without ice. So it kind of looks like you're just sipping on like a finger or two of whiskey, but it's actually a few different ingredients together. And that's just like it's actually like a classic New Orleans cocktail. It's kind of one of the earliest cocktails, supposedly. But that's just a really nice one for kind of, darker, colder weather, spirit forward. So you're very much like sipping that slowly. It's mostly spirit, a little bit of sugar and bitters, and then, 2 ounces of cognac or rye. So, yeah. So, so it's not like, margarita or Naked and Famous, like I talked about, where you got citrus and sweet in there. With this, it's like you're kind of sitting there by the fire, taking your time with it, sort of thing. But yeah, excellent cocktail. But yeah, I generally kind of go between those two, of kind of like an agave focused kind of margarita type drink, and then kind of more of the Sazerac, a little boozier but complex cocktail. So I guess I'm giving you 2. Those are kind of my go-tos.
Yeah, I also love old fashions, and
yeah,
I've only seen you reference Luxardo cherries. So if you have referenced other cherries, I haven't seen it. But I have been to bourbon events where they swear by Woodford Reserve cherries, the bourbon cherries.
Yeah.
So do you have a definitive, this is the right cherry, or are you open-minded on cherries?
Yeah. So my main thing is mainly just like, don't get the bright, like the neon red ones that are just soaking in sugar and are just like, even when you eat them, it's like, oh, tasty. Oh, that's a nice little chemical aftertaste. So the Woodford ones I have had and are also very good. Luxardo is just like a little easier to get as far as I've seen. I'm sure Woodford has theirs available a little more widely now, but Luxardo cherries are just like, they're like the old school, like brandied cherries. I mean, they're still sitting in like this kind of syrup type thing, but it's like they aren't neon red. It's not like a bunch of chemicals in there. There's like this whatever they're soaking in it. I think it's like, there's part of it is like brandy, or there's some sort of proof to it. So that's like the preservative, where versus a bunch of chemicals, it's alcohol. But like the cherries themselves are like, they're smaller. They're not, there's some super unnatural color. So they just like, you eat one of those, and then if you eat one of the neon red ones, you're like, how are these even the same species of fruit? Like they just taste like so drastically different. And I feel like they just look nicer too. Like the neon red ones just make me think, milkshake, Red Robin, whatever.
Right.
Versus the Luxardo or Woodford ones, they're dark, they're smaller, so they don't look quite as unnatural in your face. They just look classier, and they taste so much better. So that's where I'm usually just like Luxardo. Just that's kind of the get those. They are to like your $4 can of bright red cherries. The Luxardo ones are like $20 for a thing of cherries. So it is like it's a luxury, but it's I just am like, if you're going to make cocktails, like get good stuff. It doesn't mean you have to be getting the $100 bottles. Like there's some really good ingredients. That's where I often try to recommend, like in my book, I have a section on each cocktail page where it's like, all right, here's like different ingredients I recommend. And oftentimes it's bottles that are more in the $20 to $30 range for spirits and liqueurs. Just 'cause I'm like, you don't have to go crazy, but don't go bottom shelf, because like if you put crap ingredients together, you're going to have a crap cocktail. Like that's just, you can't expect an amazing cocktail without amazing ingredients. So that's where there's a level where I'm like, if it's a hobby, it's not going to be a cheap hobby, but like you don't have to go nuts, but there's a middle ground you can find by getting quality stuff.
Wine.
Right. Totally.
Don't go to the bottom shelf, but you don't have to buy the $50 bottle, if you don't want to.
I guess that's the case for anything you get into, right? Like there's always a nicer thing.
I'll often ask them, what kind of cherries do you put in your old fashioned? And if they say, oh, the little maraschino cherry, I'm like, no, I'll order something else. That's the cherry that's going in it. I don't want this drink. I don't need that.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so you're a cocktail guy, but you have experience with wine. Wine was one of the things that you said got you into the alcohol journey. I love asking people, if I were to say, hey, what's the best glass of wine you ever had? Is there a memory that comes to mind? Is there a time that you think, oh, I was with these people, we were on this trip or whatever, or a bottle that you go, that was like as good as you can remember wine ever tasting? Do you have anything comes to mind?
I mean, I feel like with wine, I just still feel very intimidated with wine. Like even coming on here, I'm like, I don't know if I can talk wine, like I'm not as articulate.
Cocktail guy feels that.
Well, because even like I live in Portland, where we've got wine countries, or right in the backyard sort of thing. And I have felt weird as the cocktail guy at wine events, where I'll get invited to stuff, and there'll be wine shop owners, and they'll pretty quickly figure like, oh, you're a cocktail guy, and I kind of pretty quickly get like shut off, like you can't hang sort of thing, where it's like I don't have their palate or their so I have like felt that a few times, not fully. I mean, I feel like people I've gotten to know at wineries are much more just like it's usually kind of the wine shop or wine bar owners where I've kind of gotten the like, I don't know about you, you're a cocktail guy. So I do kind of feel that like, oh, I don't know if I'm like quite knowledgeable enough. But just when it comes to experience wise, I mean, like I said, I didn't drink when I turned 21. Probably the first drink I had was in Spain. It was in the Basque region, and it was I think it's chocolate. It's like TX, it's this weird Basque word, and it's like pretty cheap wine. It's not like they're nice stuff. I think it's pronounced chocolate. I'm probably saying it wrong. I just remember that it sounds like they're saying chocolate, but it's like a TX is like how it starts. But it's like a slightly like naturally sparkling, but they always pour it very long. Like it's kind of this very, Spanish kind of flair thing. And it was just every bar with seafood had this chocolate stuff. And for me, that was kind of first drinking experience. The first time I really felt like buzzed, so there's always that kind of connection to it of like, it was this beautiful experience with friends walking around this, Basque region of Spain, trying the freshest seafood I've ever had. And then, these bartenders who are very just kind of, it's like very much connected to this whole experience of, it's not just here's this precious liquid. It was like, here's this slate with shrimp we caught today, and then let me pour you this wine. And they're like making like a show out of it. For me, like that was kind of, it's like my first time sort of thing. So for me, like that's always kind of had this, like, anytime I see I don't see it often, because again, it's like this kind of niche Basque wine that's not like super common. Whenever I see that in a store, it's always like some weird size, and I'm like, it's like $11, I'm getting it, so that one's always kind of felt like special to me. That's cool. In a way. And then I feel like from there it's like I said, like, I'm not super knowledgeable about it, but I've always kind of gravitated more towards, sparkling wines and like Pet Nat, and Portland, I feel like especially is kind of in the, trying to be hipster about everything, kind of the natural wine world, where it's a lot of kind of skin contact wines and orange wine. And that kind of world of wine, at least, just feels a little, there is kind of the hipster element that's a little like, okay, come on guys. Like, but that world and some of the people I've met in that world, at least, are just very like, I appreciate the, like, not feeling quite as precious about it. Where it's just very like, oh, if you're interested in learning, come learn. And there's certainly that element with kind of old world wines too. Like, I've been to the Cognac region in France, which is, again, more focused about Cognac, but it's a ton of grape vineyards and people who've been in, growing these vineyards for hundreds of years. And those people as well are like, I don't care if you know nothing about this. I'm just excited to share this with you. So I always kind of appreciate those types of people in the wine world, where it's like, it's okay if you don't speak my language, or you can't take a sip and articulate, what year or what vintage this is. Or like, I'm excited about this, and simply you showing interest and excitement is good for me. So those are always kind of the people that I'm drawn to. And then in return, I'm kind of drawn to those products or their brand.
Yeah. Love it. Well, we want to officially welcome you into the wine world.
Hey, thank you. Yeah. Maybe I should book a call with you for some lessons to talk like I know what I do.
Yeah, I'll give you the way to
drinking.
Fool everyone to thinking It's so complicated, dude. I was like, you could spend your whole life devoted to wine, and still people could stump you on, what about this region? Or, it's like,
totally.
It's so common.
I'm always fascinated. Yeah. I'm just fascinated by the people who can take a sip and just know. I'm just like, what year and what region?
I have a friend who does that, and it's really annoying, because you like taste it and you're like, I'm getting notes. And he's like, this is on the south side of it. You're like, how do you do that? And he like can pick it out exactly. And it's like, man,
gosh,
it's annoying. Hate that guy. Actually, okay, so I'm gonna ask you questions. First thing that comes to mind. I don't want you to stew on this. Just gut reaction. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Oh man, gosh, how can I not stew on that? I think I used to believe that wrong about. Geez, man. I mean, I feel like I kind of mentioned some of this when we were talking about some of this stuff earlier, of just like like leaving church or leaving Christianity. It's like, it's a walking away. It's a kind of, for me at least, like anyone I knew who left church or left youth group or whatever it was, it was always at least framed as like, oh, like they were, either got lazy, complacent and left, or it was like this very like dramatic fallen away, always kind of this fallen away language. And that's where for me, it was weird to have my own experience of leaving and being like, this actually felt very intentional. And then meeting a lot of people where it was similar, where it was like, not just like, oh, the ways of the world are just so alluring or whatever. It felt like, no, like this was actually like, this is the best thing for me and my family to leave, to step out of this, and that you can still be a good person and have a moral compass and not just have your life go to shit. So I feel like that was probably the biggest thing of just like, oh, like I'm starting to think through like, who should I go back and like apologize to for, like you mentioned, like when you leave and you're like, will anyone else, will people still even be there for me? Will anyone even call me? And I started thinking like, well, yeah, I used to be in the church and people would leave. I was like, oh, how sad they fell away. And it's like, I didn't call them. I didn't bother sitting down with them and hearing their, like what their experience was. So that's where I was starting to think through like, oh shoot, like who did I leave? Who was I that person to who was no longer there for them? And that's where it's like, oh, like how can I go reconnect with these people? Not just to be like, hey, I'm out too, but to be like, oh, like I'm sorry that I wasn't there for you.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe that's kind of, I could probably go down that trail for a bit, but
that's good.
Yeah.
What do you see as the main issues facing Christianity in America today?
Whew. Man, what heavy lightning round. Lots of that's a big questions.
This is the point. Man, I mean, got some alcohol in them, so I usually get some really honest answers by this point.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, man, I should have been pouring this 100 proof bourbon I got. That would probably get some great answers from me. But I don't know. I mean, this is always a hard one, but just especially in 2024 election year and all that, like politics is just insane, and divisions in the US especially. But yeah, I feel like, I mean, the whole kind of Christianity being attached to patriotism, and again, not fully like, I mean, again, I live in Portland, which is like, even a lot of the Christian churches I'm a part of in Portland are very more on the progressive side of things, try to not be as, you know, connected to some of the political stuff, but it's almost like, how do you not these days? Everything's just extra polarized right now. And I feel like there is this level of, I feel like, again, not really being in a church or in Christian circles necessarily, I do see a lot of goodness and hope in Christianity, but like when it's tethered to a political party or a political ideology, and like, it's like, if you're a Christian, you can only vote this way. I just am like, that is only harmful to everyone. But I'm like, especially to the religion side, like, because that was also a part of my story too, was just like, you know, just some stuff with, you know, just recent politics with Trump and all of that, whether, you know, listeners, whoever support him or not, like, there was just this side of Sunday school teachers or whoever, like people growing up who are like, nope, like you can only follow this guy or you can only vote for this guy. And me just being like, okay, but here's all this stuff he said or done, and how does this line up with the things you've taught me? And how is, like, it just seemed so like, we'll throw everything out to just make sure we're on the right political side. And again, that kind of touches what I was saying, like the lack of nuance, and just the, like, for me, I'm like, comes to Democrat, Republican, I was like, I don't really like anyone on either side. I don't see like this is the one way to go. But for Christians in the US specifically, like just being so focused on like, no, it's this political party or this person. I just don't see how that helps anybody. And I feel like that's just damaging to everyone. So I feel like, again, like I'm also trying to like answer that as nicely as I can too, because I'm like, I don't know who's listening to this. Everyone knows I'm from Portland. I generally lean more left, and you know, so no secret there. But just like, I just feel like everything is so polarized, and Christians feed into that so heavily. I think also just because like that's the water I used to swim in, so I see that where I'm like, I feel like that's damaging, not just to the divide we're experiencing as a country, but also I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if Christianity as a whole in the US will survive this of what's happening right now. And like, I don't know that. So my long short answer is politics, because it's all levels of messed up right now, being so intertwined with kind of Christianity and different faith leaders. So I don't really have a super clear cut answer, but I was like, it's all kinds of messed up, and I'm not sure how to fix that, but that's where we're at.
We'll file that as Christian nationalism for the record.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Okay, what is something blowing your mind right now?
Something blowing my mind. Anything
that you're just like thinking about, like, wow, that's interesting.
Something that's blowing my mind right now. Gosh. I mean, I have young kids, so they're always kind of like, that's, I guess, kind of the easy answer of just like having kids who are like 4 and 1 and just like, obviously like been around kids, been a youth pastor, kids pastor, but when they're your kids, it's just like a different thing. And yeah, for me, I was like not super stoked on becoming a dad or having babies. I was excited to have like grown kids someday, but I was kind of like, I could go without the newborn phase or toddlers. I was like, you can't reason with them. If I can't explain, so for me it was, and still continues, just like, it's pretty amazing how fun it is. I didn't think it would be this fun. Like, even like just a few months into having our first kid, I was like, this is really fun. Super hard. I mean, that's a given. Everyone will tell you kids are hard. Tale as old as time. But it's like, no one told me this was just going to be so freaking fun, even at like a few months old. Again, two things are true at once. Super, super hard. One of the hardest things like my wife and I have done is having kids, especially for her, physically having kids. But yeah, like raising children who you give everything for, and then they will get mad and throw fits, and when it's like, I've done everything for you, but then you have these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so fun and so beautiful, and there's nothing better in life. That always blows my mind. And I feel like every phase they grow into, I'm just like, holy, like, I feel like I'm constantly having my mind blown on the parenting side of things, for sure. On the work side of things, there's other stuff. There's always spirits I'm jumping into or learning about different things where, I feel like I have a lot of fun stuff I get to get into it in life and work. But parenting's been pretty wild, I must say.
With you. A problem you're trying to solve right now.
Problem I'm trying to solve is, I guess, to put it succinctly, maybe balance. For me, it's like I've been at this 7 years now of being self-employed as a, creative content creator, influence, all these kind of things that I do. And I feel like I've gone from kind of freelancer mindset to now business owner, where now I have, some people, I have like an admin assistant, and I have someone who kind of helps me on shoots. And, this year, getting more of the nitty gritty business stuff, like switch to an S corp, and, figuring out my finances to go like, okay, like I've done this for 7 years, and the way I've done this won't get me to the next stage of my business or of, like, all right, like we are renting, and we're like, if we want to buy a house in this crazy market, like, I don't have a W-9 or W-2 or whatever. Just making sure, like, when you're freelance, you can kind of like, all right, you have up months, you have down months, it all kind of washes out. Where I'm like, this last year I hired like an accountant, and having someone actually going through my books. And so with that, I just feel like it's become more of this behemoth of like, I'm a business owner now. I'm also a dad and a husband, and I'm trying to like actually live a life I want to live. That, that was part of being freelance, and be like, oh, I can build my own thing. But even as the thing grows, I'm like, oh, like that takes on a life of its own. And I still want to be a very present and available dad. I want to be able to take a Friday off if I want to be with my kids. And so now I just feel like I'm kind of in this new phase of like, how do I figure out balance? How do I figure out running a business versus just being a freelancer, and just kind of like 1 month at a time, I'll figure it out. Now it's like, no, like I got to think months and years down the line. It's because like I've got, 2 little girls, my wife, and people depending on me, and not just financially, but also just to be there for them and to be present and not just on my phone responding to Instagram comments all the time. So for me, I feel like this year is like just figuring out, what I need to do to run a business well, but also to be, a present father and husband as well. And that's something I guess you're always kind of adjusting and figuring out. But for me, I just feel like I've got a lot to do to kind of get out of the freelancer mindset and into kind of healthy, balanced business owner mindset. And that's easier said than done.
It's a very adult answer of you.
Oh, well, thank you.
What's something you're excited about right now?
Yeah. Excited about, I feel like I can kind of go to different buckets in my life. I've talked about some fatherhood stuff, some business stuff. And this is kind of a little more on the business end, where I've gotten more opportunities to like teach and to speak at events in person. And so much of my work and life and content, it's all online. I'm doing photo and video, and it's on social media, or it's on a digital ad somewhere, it's all online. So it's been cool. I've gotten some opportunities to speak on either, cocktail classes sort of thing, teaching people how to make drinks, or on the visual side. This year I have a lot of opportunities to share about how to do what I do, like how to capture drinks and how to capture bartenders. How do you light a bar or restaurant? How do you go in a busy hospitality environment, light it, photograph it, capture it well? Kind of has its own challenges and nuances. So I've gotten a lot of opportunities to, last week I was in New York for this big bar convention. So all these bartenders and bar owners, and I got to teach on like, here's how I go into bars and restaurants, and here's how I photograph and take video and photo, and how to capture these things like glassware and bottles that are hard to capture. So for me, like, that's just been really fun to be in person teaching. I do a lot of, like I said, video content and whatever, but to actually be with people, to pass on the knowledge I've learned, and to be able to see like I get the immediate feedback, which you don't always get online. Sometimes you get comments, likes, but getting to talk with people, getting to see the light bulb moment in people being like, that's how you do that. Cool. Like seeing that moment in people, like the moments I've had, it's kind of connected to cocktails in a way of like, it's sharing an experience with someone. And for me, it's like years of knowledge and learning and experimenting and messing up, and then getting to like pass that on and make it easier for someone else to learn the same thing. It's just been like a different area of my brain, and just like, it's something I want to chase down, where I'm just like, oh, like I'm really enjoying getting to teach and getting to like share with people, and again, making that experience, passing on that experience. And that's just something where I'm like, oh, I really want to keep doing that to a certain degree. Because I think that just activates me in a different way. It puts me in a different mindset of versus just producing, feeding the algorithm, getting so many videos out, or executing on client demands. It's just like this different part of me getting to like, it's not necessarily tied to, a video performing well or a client being thrilled with my results. It's like, here's what I've learned. Here's what I've done. Let me give it to you so you can take it and run with it. That's just been very energizing to me. And I feel like it's given me a lot of kind of new, fresh energy as I continue to be a self-employed, whatever it is I do. So
that's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I may not have asked you about?
Yeah, I don't think, we covered all kinds of stuff. This was probably one of the more like just kind of intimate conversations as far as talking about life and faith. And obviously, you've seen some of the videos. I've shared little snippets of it. So yeah, this was cool to just get to share more of that background. It's a background I've been trying to share about a bit more of, because people seem to resonate with it. So yeah, this was cool just to have kind of a longer format opportunity to share that. And yeah, if anything, just for listeners, obviously people are always like, follow me, subscribe, whatever. But also I'm like, part of social media for me is it's been so fun to actually connect with people, especially people who resonate with my own background or even just with cocktails. So that's where I'm like, hey, like, follow, yeah, but like shoot me a DM. Like, I would love to know if you heard the conversation. I'm also like, people DM me all the time with questions around cocktails. Like the first thing you asked about a spritz, or people will be like, I got this cool flavor of bitters or syrup at the store. What can I make with this? And honestly, like, I love helping people out with that stuff. So if you have cocktail questions, just hit me up on Instagram. Yeah, like sometimes I'm not always able to respond right away, but I truly love getting to help people with cocktail stuff or suggesting recipes or different things you can do. That's honestly just very fun for me and also energizing as well. So just to encourage you as well, Jeremy, and anyone else listening, like, hey, if you have cocktail questions, I'm a DM away. Hit me up. Always down to help you out.
Okay, so if someone is like, yes, I love this guy, I want to connect with them, how do they connect with you online?
Yeah. So High Proof Preacher on Instagram and TikTok. I always feel like I'm the old guy on TikTok, but but TikTok and Instagram, probably a little more responsive in the DMs on Instagram. But yeah, those are great places to get in touch. I also have another kind of account and platform called Cocktail Camera, and that's more of my educational stuff, where I educate more on the photo video side, kind of teaching people how to do content creation and photo video, in bars and restaurants and stuff like that. So if that's interesting, that's Cocktail Camera. Same thing, Instagram, YouTube channel, website, that sort of deal. But around cocktails, and just kind of probably the most responsive for if you have cocktail questions, just going to High Proof Preacher on Instagram is a good place to get in touch with me. And I have my email in my bio too. If you're like, I need to send you a bunch of links or whatever. There's lots of ways you can just kind of reach out to me there, but Instagram is probably a good place to start.
And you also have highproofpreacher.com.
Yeah. Highproofpreacher.com. I feel like I kind of started as a blog. So highproofpreacher.com was like the blog I started with. So now I kind of like, I'll dump a bunch of recipes on there. And so that's supposedly kind of a slightly more searchable way to find specific cocktail recipes. But also I'm like, that's where I feel like on Instagram, I'm like, people just use me like Google, and they're like, hey, where's your spicy margarita recipe? And I'll just send them the link on there, so they're like, they don't even bother searching my blog anymore. They're just like, hey, Jordan,
go right.
Like, you could Google this, you could search this, but whatever, I'll send it to you.
Oh, that's great. Well, hey, Jordan, it has been seriously a joy to talk to you. One of the easiest conversations I have hosted thus far on the podcast. You have such interesting answers, and I love hearing just how you're thriving in this role, how you're being honest about it. I love, and I would encourage anyone who's watching and listening, check you out on Instagram, because you talk about a lot of this stuff to your platform. And I find that very intriguing. Yeah. You're just very open with it. And so thanks for taking the time to talk and to share all this with us. And we're gonna have to meet in person at some point and have drinks together.
Totally. Yeah. Next time you're in Oregon wine country, let me know, and we'll go hard. We'll hit all the wineries.
There's over 600, so we're gonna need some time, but
we're gonna need a few weeks. But
that's awesome. Well, dude, seriously, thank you. This has been a great time.
Cool. Yeah, man. Appreciate it. Honored.
All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in with us. Obviously, we talked a little bit more cocktails today, so a little change of pace from the wine scene, but hopefully this was intriguing to you as well. I found most people who enjoy wine also enjoy beer, cocktails, and other drinks. So if that's you, this was a nice change of pace. But we so grateful that you are tuning into this, and we can't wait to have you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray. Thanks, guys.